Hey, what's up everybody, Shenmoki here. Today I'll be taking a look at all of Linkin Park's albums and ranking them from what I feel is the worst to the best. I started listening to Linkin Park when I was only 7 years old, and like a lot of people, lost interest after Minutes to Midnight. I recently gave their entire discography a go and was far from disappointed, finding a few gems along the way too. To be clear, I'll only be covering their 7 studio albums, and won't count any bonus tracks, just to keep things even. So without further ado, let's begin. At number 7, I have The Hunting Party. I know this album has had a bit of a comeback since it settled a few years back, but this is an album that I just can't really get behind. The band claimed a disdain for the softening music space upon the album's release, and regardless of whether or not they had a point, their attitude reeked of boomer energy. And honestly, The Hunting Party just feels half-baked. The guitars are loud, sure, but they sound a bit flaky and uninspired. And the mixing on some songs, especially A Line in the Sand and Guilty All the Same, just feel like amateur hour. Plus, Rakim on that track, I mean, really? He's a solid MC and his lyrics are decent on that track, but he just feels lost in the mix. Literally. And speaking of rapping, man, Mike Shinoda was just whack on this. He sounds like he's trying way too hard to sound, well, hard. Like coming after other rappers for not being as good as him flow-wise and lyrics-wise? Mike, I like you dude, but your rapping has pretty much always been passable at best. It really feels like Linkin Park was acting angry for no good reason. And this is conveyed even more poorly through the lyrics, which are without a doubt my least favorite consistently throughout. A message doesn't have to be groundbreaking, but if you say a simple message in a simple way, like on Guilty All the Same or War, it just loses all impact. This is one reason why I love Death Grips and Clippings music so much. You can have a banging sound and it'll get your head bobbing, sure. But if you want a full, visceral experience, you want what's coming out of your mouth to match that energy. And it's just not possible with lyrics like, "There's no peace, only war. Victory decides who's wrong or right." And "wanna skate and play it safe, but this is take a shot time." Like, I'm not asking for Shakespeare, but most of the lyrics were just overly simple. I'd like to say Chester is a redeeming value on this album, but I don't know. His performances were just okay at best to me. I know he had come in late to recording after touring, and maybe that took a toll on his vocals, or maybe at this point in his career his vocal cords were giving up on him. But for such a hardcore and metal album, this was one of Chester's weaker performances. I don't doubt that Linkin Park put effort into this album, but it just feels very cobbled together, and the heavier sound just feels a bit baseless. My favorites from this one were Until It's Gone, Rebellion, and A Line in the Sand. So with everyone having left the video in a huff, let's move on to number 6. Here I have One More Light, easily the most polarizing album to date. The album caused a complete uproar in the music world, with Linkin Park fans disappointed in the extremely soft and poppy direction, and onlookers seeing the legendary Linkin Park as having sold out. Of course, we know the full story now, and it's easy to say that without the passing of Chester Bennington, this album would easily be everyone's least favorite, but due to it being so personal to the legend themselves, fans have given it a pass, and rank it higher than they would, rather than just dissecting the music itself. So, even when I'm looking at the album that way, it's still not my least favorite. I mean, okay, Good Goodbye is pretty much unlistenable, and the album takes almost no risks and has very few highlight moments. But to its credit, it is a very catchy album, and some of the melodies are bound to get stuck in your head. And yeah, the sounds are mostly run-of-the-mill, but many of the synths and the recurring high-pitched vocal samples sound good, sometimes great like on Battle Symphony. Lyrically, yeah, we can all agree the choruses are very run-of-the-mill and safe, but the verses, even if they weren't deeply personal to Chester, are still rock solid. Chester's performances as well are heartbreaking given his passing, but even without that in mind, they convey his emotion phenomenally. Mike's solid here too when he does come in. But again, other than the title track, there is very little to come away with and really feel an urge to come back to. However, there's very little here that's offensively bad or really leaves a bad taste in your mouth. At its best, it can be deeply emotional and moving, and at its worst, it's passable ear candy. Favorite tracks from this were Nobody Can Save Me, Heavy, and of course, One More Light. Rest in peace, Chester.
Yeah, here we go for the 100th time. Hand grenade pins in every line. Throw them up and let's...
And at number 5, we have Minutes to Midnight. Here was another polarizing one. A bit political and a bit softer than their other albums despite their newfound explicit lyrics, Linkin Park really shook their fanbase with this one. Given how impactful the album was with multiple smash hits on it, a political jab at George W. Bush, and a divergence from their old sound, there should be a lot to talk about, but to me this album's a bit boring, to be honest. I once put this album to my friends as just boneless hybrid theory, and for me that just keeps getting more and more true as I give it more listens. Other than the completely electrifying Given Up, when the album tries to be energetic like with What I've Done, Bleed It Out, No More Sorrow, it just falls a bit short. And when it tries to be emotional and somber like on Hands Held High, In Between, and Valentine's Day, it often only half conveys that emotion. Don't get me wrong, these are all solid songs on their own, but why would I ever listen to these songs over their other releases which cover these tones and themes with more gusto? And that's my main issue with Minutes to Midnight. There are some highlights on it, but why bother with it if other bands and the very same band have done the same sort of song better before? It just lingers in this middle ground where I want to listen to it but just find myself unfulfilled by the end. Favorite songs here were Given Up, Bleed It Out, and The Little Things Give You Away. At number 4, I have Living Things. This is another one that doesn't have any major downsides like the bottom two albums, but doesn't have too many highlights either. I feel like it's a bit more complete and unique than Minutes to Midnight, giving it the edge over it. It feels more focused, especially given the concise runtime, and feels like it uses that time to its full advantage. The album feels like a good combination of everything the band had done up to that point. A bit of Thousand Suns' experimentation, some Meteora-esque synths, and some Hybrid Theory and Thousand Suns vocals. While it's a bit lacking on guitars, the instrumentation is solid throughout, and it's great for someone like me who just loves synths. Chester's vocals too were fabulous. He really nailed the singing as well as the harder sections like on Lies, Greed, Misery, and Victimized. It's just unfortunate that the consensus people attached to the album is that it doesn't do anything wrong, but can never be put near number 1 on anyone's list. And while the songs are solid, it has the Minutes to Midnight issue of having very few of them appear on someone's top 20 Linkin Park songs. Still though, the album is fun and energetic throughout, and has some cool experimentation like on Victimized and Until It Breaks. It's a great album to start someone out on Linkin Park with. Favorite songs on here were Lost in the Echo, Roads Untraveled, Powerless, and I'll Be Gone. Now before I get to number 3, just as a disclaimer, I hold these 3 albums in much higher regard than the former album, and I don't consider the number 3 on the album to be close to Living Things, despite their relation on my list. So with that out of the way, number 3 is...
I watch how the moon sits in the sky on a dark night, shining with the light from the sun. The sun doesn't give light to the moon, assuming the moon's gonna owe it one. It makes me think of how you act for me.
Oh, you didn't leave? Thanks, man. Well, here's the new metal classic, Hybrid Theory. You guys already know what's good about it. Insatiable choruses, memorable verses, experimental yet familiar instrumentation, and introspective but still accessible lyrics. It's done nothing but inspire and touch the hearts and minds of music listeners everywhere for over 20 years now, and with every day that passes, songs like In the End, Paper Cut, and Crawling cement themselves further as absolute classics of the early 2000s. So why is this album not at my number 2 or number 1 spot? Well, I do have to say that giving this album plenty of re-listens lately, which is far from a difficult task, some of the tracks on here are really starting to show their age. It's in a similar spot that Kanye West's 808s and Heartbreak is now. It's still a great album for what it is, but the sound has been so much better explored and built on since its release that coming back to it at times makes it sound lackluster. And in Hybrid Theory's case, Linkin Park did this to themselves with its successor, Meteora. Some specific examples of this would be Points of Authority, Forgotten, and Runaway. Still decent listens, but a lot of the sonic qualities just feel noticeably ancient. Just because we can understand why the album is starting to show its age doesn't mean that makes it less noticeable. And I do have to say that literally every song on the album following the verse, chorus, verse, Angry Chester bridge, chorus structure was very repetitive, and it's the only real negative that the album has always had. The only reason its poor aging is even a factor for its number 3 spot though, is because I think number 1 and 2 spots have aged phenomenally, which makes Hybrid Theory's aging much more noticeable in comparison. Still though, none of these issues ever make me feel like skipping a track, it's just something that occasionally grates on me while listening to it. Favorite tracks here were Paper Cut, Crawling, In the End, A Place for My Head, and Pushing Me Away.
Waiting for the end to come, wishing I had strength to stand.
At number 2, splitting up Linkin Park's Titans, I have 1,000 Suns. Linkin Park's most experimental and frankly weird album. Despite its strange qualities though, 1,000 Suns is a rock-solid concept album, exploring the struggles of war and life during war when weapons have reached such damning and ruthless power. Even with these lofty themes being covered though, the album still feels every bit as emotional and personal as Linkin Park at its best, even if it takes some getting used to with its off-kilter sound and unique vocals from Chester and Mike. And putting Mike on some harmonic vocals was a great call. His soothing voice plays off Chester's more raspy and smoky voice perfectly, and I'm glad they used what they found here on later albums. The album also features some of both vocalists' best performances ever. Chester on Blackout and Waiting for the End, and Mike on When They Come For Me and The Catalyst are some of my all-time personal favorite vocals from them. Sometimes Mike's braggadocious rapping on When They Come For Me or Wretches and Kings were hard for me to come to terms with, but honestly they fit the themes of the album so much better than on The Hunting Party, so they're much more easily digestible here. Also noticeable is Chester's sometimes wacky inflections like on Wretches and Kings and Blackout. They were also hard to get used to, but when I did, it just added to the album's character. I think it is agreeable that there aren't too many tracks here that you can just pull out and put on a playlist. Most of them work because of what preceded or succeeded them in the album's tracklist, but that's fine. Because as a listening experience, I think this album trumps just about every other Linkin Park album. I mean, this thing is one of their longest albums and it just flies by. Favorite songs on here were Burning in the Skies, Robot Boy, Waiting for the End, Blackout, Iridescent, and The Messenger. Well, now that I mention it, there is one album that's a better listening experience. And yes, of course, at number 1 is Meteora. I mean, most of you guys saw this one coming. This is without a doubt Linkin Park at their absolute best, and I don't want to hear another word about it. Somewhere I Belong, Easier to Run, Faint, Figure 9, Breaking the Habit, like, shit man, just listing a few tracks makes me want to go listen to it. It matches Hybrid Theory's energy while managing to be more accessible, and without losing any of Hybrid Theory's unique sonic qualities, while adding some much needed slower and softer moments, perfectly married to the explosive nature of this Linkin Park era. The choruses are the catchiest by a mile, and come on, everyone knows every word to Faint and Numb, regardless of whether or not you're a Linkin Park fan. It's my surprise upon picking this up on CD, the album flows itself perfectly. So not only does this album have the ability to pick out songs and put it on a playlist like on Hybrid Theory, but it also has 1,000 Suns' insatiable flow and ease of listening. It's a masterpiece through and through, with some of Linkin Park's all-time best instrumentation and vocal performances, with no doubt the best lyrical content. Favorite songs here were, well, everything. I guess just looking at the track list it'd be Session, but it bridges Nobody's Listening and Numb so well that I just can't bring myself to do it. Faint is my all-time favorite Linkin Park song, so I hope that counts for something. And that about wraps up my list. I hope you guys enjoyed it. What's your list looking like? Any favorite songs? Anything you thought I overlooked? Well, that's it for me guys. Thank you for watching.